He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is The Alex Marlow Show.
All right, everyone, cool show for you today. I sit down with Sean Stone, who's a filmmaker and is also the son of Oliver Stone. And we have a lot in common. I think we grew up in somewhat similar areas, even though him having a famous, very worldly director father makes it a little different. But we get into that, and then his documentary on both Robert Kennedy's RFK legacy about Robert Kennedy Jr. and Sr. Really interesting. It's out now from our friends at the Angel Studios, who I know have been sponsors of the show in the past and are big sponsors of Salem Network in general, and they did a great job with this thing. It is getting really, really strong reviews on IMDb, and we have a long conversation, and we learn a lot about him and his background, and he's got a really unique, I think, perspective, clearly does, and the film itself, plus the history and the power of the Kennedy family and where Robert Kennedy Jr. fits in and his leadership qualities as well. So you're going to enjoy this. It's a perfect one to head into the holiday weekend. So happy Thanksgiving to all of you, and I hope you enjoy my interview with Sean Stone. Okay, I got a perfect idea for you. Long weekend. You should watch Call Sign Courage, the story of Space Force Commander Matt Lohmeyer. He's the one who blew the lid off the military's DEI agenda. He saw how the Marxist messaging, the critical race theory, the rampant DEI training was changing the culture of the military, and suddenly everyone was equal. They'd stripped away merit-based selection and promotions, and the lack of accountability, competency, and effectiveness had actually become a domestic threat. He spoke up how it was tearing apart the military's unity, readiness, and the whole reason why we have a military in the first place, which is lethality, the ability to fight and win wars. They broke into his home. He was spied on and threatened, but Lohmeyer didn't back down. So career officers, they kicked him out. But President Trump came in, and he saved the day. He made him Undersecretary of the Air Force so he could solve the problem. And when the stakes were high, this was the guy who stood up. That's why you shouldn't miss Call Sign Courage, the Matt Lohmeyer story. You can watch it and buy the DVD, salemnow.com. You can watch it there or buy the DVD, Call Sign Courage. Why wouldn't you check it out this long weekend? Do it. All right, new guest to the show, Sean Stone, filmmaker, and he's got a new movie, RFK Legacy, which is put together by our friends at the Angel Guild, who were with the program for a while. I watched on the Angel Guild app, and you can get on Apple, Amazon, and all Sean's stuff is really good. Also son of Oliver Stone, so famous for that as well, an actor, and a pretty cool history, interesting person as well. Sean, you know, you and I were in the LA prep school circuit at the same time, but I don't think we've ever crossed paths before. But you were at Brentwood, and I was at Harvard Westlake, I think, at the same time. And
Really?
you became a sort of a contrarian kind of early, as did I. But also you had some, if I'm familiar with your background, but you had sort of a normal childhood to some degree, even though your dad is super famous and semi-controversial figure. But talk to me a little bit about growing up in LA and in Hollywood and how that sort of formed your worldview.
Well, see, I don't think of it like I grew up in LA. I mean, I had a very, you could say pedestrian suburban life in West LA, Santa Monica. But I also was traveling the world since I was a kid. Yeah. So, the first 10 years of my life, it was like we were doing a film a year, and, it was from Mexico to Philippines to New York to Dallas, to back to Philippines, to New Orleans, to California, to, you name it, right? It was like just Thailand. It was like bouncing around a lot and a lot of interaction. So I basically had a chance to, I would say, interface with different cultures, different religions, spiritual, different spiritual beliefs, including my dad's, because he became a Buddhist at the time and would take me to like Tibet and India and Nepal, and we were in Africa and like checking out the refugee camps and seeing the consequences of the war in Kosovo and Serbia and Bosnia. So it was like it was very it was a very like rich experience of childhood. It was one day you're a gymnastics class, or Little League baseball, and the next year you're over in like a rice paddy in Thailand, and,
Wow.
or in Vietnam. Seeing again like the consequence of the war there, and a lot of the memories that obviously my dad and others shared from that conflict. So it's yeah, it was a very like expansive childhood, I would say, not quite normal.
Yeah, no, not at all in a lot of ways. But then sometimes there were some things that seemed like they grounded you in sort of a normal level. So out of those memories of touring around the world, were there any highlights or lowlights, any parts of the world? Because I'm not nearly as well traveled. I kind of get all my travel info from books for the most part.
Yeah.
But it sounded like every year you were somewhere wild.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's why it's very funny. I mean, people ask me that stuff like, "Where's your favorite country? What's your
Yeah.
favorite food? What's your favorite
Right.
movie?" I'm like, I don't have those things. I've never
Yeah.
had those things. I appreciate experiences, and I think that's what creates the beauty of one's life. It's like, how do you value a rice field, and the humidity of like a Thailand, to you know the mountains of the Swiss mountains, let's say, right, or the north of Italy. It's like similar in some ways, but just very unique experiences, and also different times in my life where, you know, as we go through life, right, we're growing. I would suggest, hopefully, we're growing, even if we don't think we are. We're growing in these experiences with where we are in our journey and who we're experiencing them with, and yeah, like some just different phases, right? So I don't really know how to compare my life travels because I've enjoyed so many of them.
So I want to talk a little bit about the connection your family's got to the Kennedy family, because the movie's about Robert Kennedy Sr. and Jr. And your dad's kind of the star of it. He interviews Robert Kennedy in Robert Kennedy Jr. in it, and he made the JFK film, which I think initially it was not very well received. I don't think, if I remember correctly, and then now it's kind of popular. People see it as a great film, I think now, and so you guys have
Very
this
well
rich
received.
history.
Well,
Yeah.
JFK very well received in the sense that it grossed almost 200 million or
Oh
something.
my gosh! Wow.
91, back when that meant something.
Yeah. Right.
Nowadays, it's like every blockbuster grosses, like $500,000 or whatever. But this was 91, when
Yeah.
it was like $200 to $300 million it made
But it
internationally.
was seen as controversial, is what I meant. And then I think
Oh,
now
certainly,
people seem to
certainly
get it more.
I don't know that people like. I think people always got it because remember the consensus according to the polls that had been done since at least 67, 68 was that majority of Americans thought Oswald did not act alone.
Mhm.
So the mainstream, I think most Americans have always questioned the JFK murder and the conspiracies around it. The mainstream media has never allowed people to question it. So that's why the controversy is really the mainstream media denying reality. And I think that's the bigger issue, is mainstream media denial of a lived reality and lived experiences of Americans. And we saw it, we've seen it many times in our lifetime, and most recently during COVID, right? When they literally had to go to extremes of like censorship to try to get people to conform to their narratives.
What is the Kennedy family? And I know they don't speak as a block, but what do they think of the JFK film when it came out?
So it was interesting. The Kennedy family was not supportive of the film when it came out. There was some dialogue between my father and JFK Jr. And if I recall, JFK Jr. interviewed my dad, but I know they had some level of correspondence in the 90s. And he was like the only one who was relatively like interested in questioning things, because the majority of, again, kind of like with RFK Jr., like the idea that, look, the family's huge. You're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of people, but the idea that, the consensus around the Kennedy family, right, is that they don't agree with RFK Jr. They think he's an oddball and, that he's wrong, right? I think it's similar with the film, that the consensus was, how dare my dad show the Zapruder film.
Right.
And so like
Yeah.
some of the graphic like autopsy photos and whatnot. That's what I remember.
And so there's a connection here because, then you're taking on RFK. I'm sure this was a conscious thing that he'd made a major movie on JFK, and then you're taking on RFK. So your family is this connection could you give us some nuance into that? Because it's something that's probably, there's probably something drawing your families together.
Yeah, who knows, right? Like some soul. It's an interesting question. I don't, my dad was not a JFK fan as a kid. He grew up in a Republican household. His father was an Eisenhower, really an Eisenhower Republican, and voted, his dad voted for Nixon. I think my dad supported Goldwater in 64. By 68, I think he pretty much dropped out of American society, and he went to Vietnam and was doing, was basically on his own trip, and came back from the war, obviously very changed, haunted by it, I think, and trying to figure out his place in society and just in the world, right? Like from a spiritual view. So I think that was some big spiritual awakenings that occurred for him there. So when he came back to, you see like his films largely speak to that generation, from Platoon to Born on the 4th of July, Nixon, The Doors, right? These are all contemporaries. And then JFK fits right into that because a lot of people felt JFK was responsible for the Vietnam War. That was the narrative. That was the mainstream narrative. And I think that was part of what piqued my dad's interest when looking at this project, was the counter narrative to that is actually no. And these were some of the major claims that you can't really dismiss, that, in the film JFK, that they make this point. It was this national security memorandum that Kennedy issued, basically withdrawing basically they were going to withdraw 1,000 advisors, I guess in 64, and then basically he was talking about withdrawing everything by the second term. If he made it to the second term and won, he really wanted to de-escalate the American commitment. He openly had said, it's a civil war. It's a war between North and South. We can support the South, but in the end of the day, they have to fight for themselves.
Right.
So the idea really in my dad's mind was, in not just his mind, obviously the people that had looked at this from the perspective of, no, this was not JFK. Vietnam was not JFK's war. Lyndon Johnson did not just carry JFK's policies. JFK was a very nimble, a diplomatic personality who, as we saw with the Cuban Missile Crisis, was able to negotiate with the Soviets and de-escalate the conflict. In Laos, there was a similar desire for escalation because Laos, like Vietnam and Cambodia, were all CIA. The CIA was very interested in operating in coups and basically overthrowing, governments, or at least moving the governments toward being basically under our financial control, let's say. And a lot of it had to do with drug money because the CIA had basically worked with the mafia in setting up these, not setting up, really taking over from the French, the heroin traffic, right? Since the French had the colony in Indochina. So there was a lot of money coming out of this trafficking. And it was part of our commitment to to these conflicts was the getting hold of that drug money. And so, basically, I think Kennedy was very astute to seeing what was going on. And just like with Cuba, he was not willing to commit American troops to overthrow Castro in 61. So what makes people think that he was going to commit American troops to, save South Vietnam from North Vietnam in 64 and 65? I think that, his mindset would have been different. So that was, I think, what intrigued my father to the JFK storyline, was to say, let's correct history and state really that JFK was pro-peace, and he wanted to figure out ways of negotiating with our so-called enemies, our rivals in the Soviets, and had he lived, we don't believe that the Vietnam War would have escalated to what it became, which was obviously this horrible conflict, took millions of Vietnamese lives, tens of thousands of American lives, even more casualties that are that were crippled, as with Ron Kovic, the Born on the 4th of July story, and others that were, maimed, wounded, psychologically destroyed. I mean, it's devastating what war does. And so I think my dad, being a veteran, just felt very called to tell that story, and as a result, has always been an admirer of JFK and his ability to, I think, listen to the other side, to be able to try to negotiate, navigate conflict without becoming belligerent and bellicose. And so I think that's why, you could say at a soul level, my father really loved JFK and his brother and RFK, and also, RFK Jr. He, we feel is very much carrying on in their tradition.
If memory serves, your dad enlisted voluntarily, correct?
Yeah.
In Vietnam?
Yeah.
That's an amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, he was in a dark place, and he's written a lot about it. I mean, he's written about it in Child's Night Dream, his novel. He's written about it in Chasing the Light, his autobiography. He was in a dark place, and he dropped out of Yale and basically wanted to live a Joseph Conrad Heart of Darkness type of experience. I think, he woke up to a different reality, that war was not this romantic ideal that we'll see in war films.
Yeah, interesting. So you were a really early adopter to Trump. I think you saw Trump's rise and the explanation for it really early. I don't know what your dad thinks of him. What does your dad think of him?
So it's interesting. I did a docuseries called All the President's Men.
Yeah.
It's on Tucker Carlson's network now. And it's a 6-part investigation into the Russiagate conspiracy. But the conspiracy was much more our own intelligence services. It's creating a conspiracy and conspiring to create a conspiracy than it was evidence of Trump being a Russian agent or asset.
Right. And that's right. That was the real conspiracy.
And so we did this 6-part series in interviewing people like Papadopoulos and John Solomon and General Flynn and Kash Patel and Giuliani and Tucker and Roger Stone. And my dad loved the series and actually understood, like he basically was like supporting Trump. I think he voted for RFK Jr., but he supported Trump winning. And obviously RFK Jr. throwing his hat in, he understood it. And I think the issues that my dad agrees with Trump on are largely things like wanting peace with this Russia-Ukraine conflict. He sees the fact that Trump has not started a new war and is obviously happy, but he also sees Trump's bellicosity and I don't think he appreciates the way that he handles things. He doesn't have the class that JFK had, for example. And I think that's important, in terms of perception. I think that, a lot of people, I think Trump loses a lot of people because of his crass nature and just kind of his, he's very blunt. And I think he could have massaged a lot more egos and kind of gotten away with more if he'd just done things a little bit more diplomatically.
Yeah. It's a common critique. I see where it comes from. There's something really interesting here because both of you and your dad have really interesting mosaics of, I think, ideas that you're concerned with and you're preoccupied with and that come through in your art. And not all that I think is completely aligned with sort of Trumpism and Trump's worldview, but then both of you see why he makes sense relative to other establishment politicians. I just want to hear you describe some of that in your words.
Some of what?
Yeah, I just want to hear what you feel like he understands that the rest of the establishment politicians don't get.
Well, he's not the establishment. He's not the establishment as we've known it.
Yeah.
Maybe he is the establishment in a way that I think is, more complex. But let's say as far as the politicians that are just career politicians, right? Then we get exhausted by these people because I think Obama is kind of a great example of it. Clinton is a great example of it. They are very charming. They are so-called eloquent. They sound intelligent and they really just tell you what you want to hear. And ultimately they just kind of go, as I say, go along to get along, right, with a certain system. Trump is more of a system breaker in his best way. We hope, that he's actually going to shake out this entrenched deep state, which is really just like a permanent bureaucracy that has developed. And look, I mean, you can point to the huge expansion of federal power and spending across, going back really to FDR, right? And like this is 80 years now.
Sure.
More, 90 years of massive federal spending. And to the place where you're almost 40 trillion in debt, I don't even know how much every year they're racking up in the trillion. And you're paying 14% interest on top of it. There's a problem here. There's a big problem that we have to face. And maybe the bankruptcy king is the guy that's going to help us reorganize this. So there's a hope with Trump that he will fulfill some of, you could say, like the QAnon kind of, belief that he's helping to clean out this system, or that he's here with so-called white hats to clean out a system that we know is based in real conspiracies, real thing. A lot of this monetary system, there's arms and drugs and human trafficking. I mean, this is a huge reality, and a lot of those funds are going through the banking system. They're in many ways they're being laundered through the banking system, and we obviously would like a cleaner world. But then when you see things like the Jeffrey Epstein files being first Trump saying it doesn't exist, and now they're it's like, why are you saying they don't exist? And then a month, 2 months later, you're releasing stuff. I mean, it's just like you can't. You really think like, can I trust this person?
So give me your thoughts on the Epstein saga in general, because this I think has obviously been the weakest part of the administration the first year. I think I don't think they've missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity on that. I think every single time they've missed on this. But what do you think they could have done better on this? And what do you think people are really waiting for online with these files?
I think we feel that I think there's evidence for this, that Epstein was involved with intelligence, and that at the heart of it is like what Whitney Webb has articulated with her One Nation Under Blackmail, that there's operations that go on which involve blackmailing of powerful people, politicians and others, celebrities, you name it, using underage sex, whether it's 16, 17 or very young. And the fact that Trump and company have kind of turned this into a Democrat conspiracy. I mean, it's weird. It's like you've given the power to the Democrats now. Why? This was your opportunity to kind of to
totally right. This. You're totally right.
Take the lead and expose what's going on and say we want transparency.
And then also Speaker Johnson, who I was saying something positive about him yesterday on yesterday's show, but I'll tell you on this, him saying that it could compromise national security to release the files. Like, well, that's the whole point. I mean, that's why we want them out. Is like, doesn't that give away that if it's what does files on a convicted sex predator have to do with national security? If they have something to do with one another, then that's exactly why we need the files.
Correct. And again, this has been the problem. But you go back to JFK. We can't show you the files. Why? National security. Okay, this is 60 years ago. Who are we securing at this point?
Right. Yeah. It's well, and that's the whole thing, is that the messaging matters, because it doesn't. I'm generally kind of have an approach which is funny, because I do a lot of hyping up things and trying to get people concerned and freaked out about certain threats. But occasionally I'm telling people this isn't as big of a threat, and I want to move you on to something else. And everything they do on this one makes me feel, it just reassures me that it is a threat. Like, there's nothing nothing that ever comes out makes me feel better about the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, I mean, it's concerning. I mean, again, it's like when you go from there are no files to now we're declassifying stuff.
Right.
Okay. So you lied to us a few months ago, and you want us to forget that you said this, and you dismissed it all as there was nothing there.
Okay, when Black Friday just got brighter, what if you could Treat deep muscle pain from home with 25% off a device that feels like healing light in your hands. This is the Super Palm 1050 from SunPower LED. It's a powerful, handheld, photobiomodulation device using dual wavelengths. We're talking 660 nanometers of red and 1050 nanometers of near infrared for deep tissue penetration. In clinical research, that 1050 nanometer setting reaches deeper into the muscles and joints, exactly where chronic pain resides. And the 4 joules per centimeter squared in just 25 seconds on the NIR, the near infrared mode, that also penetrates deeply as well, hitting different parts of the muscles and the joints. They get a lot of safety features, cooling fan, temperature monitors, a fuse circuit to make it easy to use daily, and a patent-pending cooling system. SunPowerLED.com. They got the fan in there, chill everything out, and I've got a testimonial to read to you. I've tried light therapy before, but this is different. I was skeptical, but after using the Super Palm 1050 on my lower back and hip, the relief is real. My mobility is improved, and I don't dread stiffness anymore. This is hands down the best handheld red light device I've found, and right now for Black Friday, you get 25% off on the Super Palm 1050. Don't wait. Tap to buy, feel deeper relief, and step into the new year without pain. We'll put the link in the show notes for you, but again, sunpowerled.com, 25% off from Black Friday. That's a killer deal. We're going to come back with a promo code for the Marlow show, but I'll tell you, I don't even think you get the full 25% right now for Black Friday. That's a great promo. You're going to want to check it out, and this could be exactly what you need for your health.
You know?
Yeah. So what do you feel like is the real threat? What are you concerned about right now in terms of, this has been a conversation a lot on the right in general, what is the real problem now? Because I tend to be of the mindset where I tend to feel like, this is very much the normie approach to it. I guess the Occam's razor approach. The political left is still the biggest threat right now. And the establishment, we've got the establishment on the run. Deep state continues to be a big threat. Globalists continue to be a big threat. The military-industrial complex continues to be a big threat. But, overall, I'm trying to spend as much time as I can taking on the left because I feel like they're the ones who are really they're the ones who are going to destroy everything. But I know there are a lot of people who I really like clearly disagree. They spend their time on other threats. I mean, what are you preoccupied with right now?
I'm not so much caught up with threats at the moment. I feel more like the biggest threat is financial, the monetary system, and this infinite debt machine that I think this is really what's burying a lot of people, and it's scary. When it seems like when this gets articulated, Trump doesn't want to acknowledge it, or just face the fact that inflation is still a killer, and a lot of us have basically lived with it our entire lives, and we're seeing the consequence of how it affects our livelihood, right? How we can earn enough to really have a comfortable life. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So to me, getting a hold of this monetary inflation and basically whether it's a jubilee or something, right, to get people out of this infinite debt trap.
Yes.
We need to address this, and then I just think uplifting ourselves as a nation. It's not so much left versus right in my mind.
Are you calling for jubilee? Because that's kind of cool. I hadn't thought of that.
I'm calling for jubilee, actually. I am calling for it's well beyond the 7 or 7 times 7, 49. I mean, whatever, how many years it's supposed to be every 7 years, but we're way beyond.
Yeah, right.
Jubilee. But yeah, I think we need to get into like the soul of this country in a sense of a future where we feel like positive and uplifting and optimistic about it. Because that's what I grew up in, and I'm sure you did too. And these until the 90s, it was a culture, like the best music, the best movies. There was a reason that we felt like optimistic about the future. And I feel like since the turn of the century, it's kind of been like the decline of the American century. And it's all about the global corporation, and it's the faceless, it's the faceless technocrats and whatnot. Just, it feels very soulless and heartless right now as a culture.
Right.
So I engage more, on that level as an artist and as a creator, and I have to face that, that challenge of, basically creating in the face of these machines, these faceless gatekeepers, these people that, are shutting you down. When I'm saying, okay, we have to decentralize power, we have to decentralize creativity, and that's where I think, that's what I believe in. And then, having debates, with people, just friendly debates, conversations, like test out ideas. Like that's where we win, in the sense of trying things, as a nation, right? If it's not about like, okay, the left is so crazy. Yeah, in certain ways, like we saw the extreme of the left during COVID, right? I mean, you can't unlook at what the left was willing to do and what they were willing to basically enforce upon their, fellow humans. It was dehumanizing, right? It
That's
was
right.
like, mask, you must take a shot, you must do this, you must stay, you must stay away. That was dehumanizing. And the authoritarian.
And this is very radicalizing for you. You left California at this point.
Yeah, I left California.
Yeah, and it's because of the radicalization of the authoritarianism, really.
It doesn't work for me, and I don't think it works for America. And I think that was the point, that it didn't work for America. And ultimately, I think America rejected it, and then we rejected the Biden administration for this. And there was this. So I feel like, okay, people get what, how do you say, we're getting why Trump made sense in 24, and, still has an opportunity to make sense, but we still need to like focus on our country. Like we talk about Jubilee, also just like infrastructure, a future, like the way that China is planning for 1,000 years. And I feel like we're watching our cities crumble before our eyes.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to be optimistic about the future when you don't have a feeling like people are investing in the future. People are really like excited by the technological evolution and growth and the opportunities that are going to arise. But it starts with, an overall perspectives. Like, why don't we have high-speed rail in this country? Which is like something I've been talking about since I was like a kid. It's just like simple things that we could be doing to, update and increase our overall technological levels, our energy. Like we could, be shifting more to like hydrogen fuels and potentially nuclear fission processes. Ultimately, nuclear fusion is the goal. But a lot of these things that I don't feel like they're part of the cultural landscape even.
Well, I want to talk to you about, this is where I want to move the discussion. I want to get to the film here, but I want to talk to you about just the culture in general and how people are consuming content these days. You've made some documentaries recently, but you've also made just sort of more traditional narrative films. Your father's made more narrative films. I think he's done some documentaries too, but there was a moment where that was the best way to consume culture, to get out culture. I mean, there was a time where we were all readers. I mean, that seems like, as someone who writes books, that feels a little bit like a bygone era. But it's I heard an interview with you, Sean, with my old friend Brett Easton Ellis, and we have something in common. Both of our mothers were reading Stephen King when we were in the womb. So
wow.
That's a funny one. My mom mentioned that all the time, and you said that. I thought, that's unbelievable. Same thing here. But I want to talk about it's really a well-made movie, and you weave in several narratives, and you are able to play with time in a really effective way that keeps you engaged with it. And so it's very competent, and you know what you're doing, obviously. I'm more thinking about how people consume content, because I'm starting to feel like now people say things like Twitter is not real life. Well, I'm starting to feel like real life is not real life some days. I'm starting to feel like the real you is your avatar online. And it just, the way we're engaging with content, like that's the primary who we are, is how we engage with the content some days. Yeah. And I reject it on a personal level, but ultimately I'm one vote out of 8 billion here.
Yes. Well, real life is not real life because we're understanding more and more the quantum nature of reality, that it's a subjective experience, right? And the more that we recognize, that's why as our consciousness shifts, so our reality shifts, right? Where we look, it's like what we choose, where we decide to look, all of a sudden our perception's going to change, right? And all of a sudden it's going to will be reinforced. I think a lot of people experience that all the time, where you'll have we'll have a debate with someone. That's why I'm like, what's the point of debating with the left? They literally are getting reinforced by what they believe in. So everywhere if you search what you want to find. If you search it, you will find it, right? You will find validation of your perspective. So it's almost like you can't. That's why I say you can't really debate at this point. You just have to go out there and do.
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
And that's why it was like during COVID, it was like, okay, you guys are here in California, you're locked down, you can't go anywhere without your vaccine passport. I'm going to go over here. I don't have to wear a mask. I get to be free. I get to enjoy. I think this works better. And we're just going to test it and see what works better, right? And you choose your reality. So you want to live in authoritarianism, good power to you. You go live in that modality. I'm gonna live in freedom. And I think that's what we're experiencing, is just like different reinforcements of where our consciousness is taking us.
All right, so let's get in the film. So it's a dive into both RFKs, our senior and junior. And I learned a lot during it. And you have participation from the Kennedy family, from RFK himself, who does interviews which your dad conducts, which is really, really terrific content. And he's one of my favorite cabinet members, even though a lot of his history is not necessarily my exact politics. I just love what he represents as an American individual and his willingness to stick his neck out there and to take risks and to be a leader and to actually work. And a guy who didn't need to work and just worked and paved his own way in an amazing way. But I want to go back to his dad. And when you're going through the history, what of the RFK Sr.'s history did you really feel like you wanted to convey to a contemporary audience?
I feel that this is, wow. It was a journey into courage and leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously, look, the story is you could say biased. You could say like, almost like limited in scope, right? In terms of the events that we wanted to focus on. But the courage to challenge, you talked about the military industrial complex earlier, right?
Yeah.
Basically an establishment that is very much like set in its way. And first it was, JFK with his brother at his side, making very important decisions around, not invading Cuba, for example, not escalating to war, with the Soviets during the missile crisis. And ultimately, we don't go into all the reasons, but JFK is, killed by a conspiracy. RFK even believed that, which is what's interesting, right? It was getting the perspective of RFK about his brother's death, and then about RFK Jr. about his father's death. So I wanted to very much convey like this sense of what a politician could be, right? Which is to be courageous in the face of death, because ultimately this story is about that. It's about how we cope with loss. We're all going to face it, right? We all face death in our friends and our family and in our own life. And how do we address that? Do we find greater courage? Do we continue on, to do what's right? Or do we let fear of death, fear of loss prevent us from living our best life?
I think that's true. His courage really does come through a lot throughout the book. Him taking on the mob, taking on military industrial complex, and he would come up with these issues where no one else was on them. And I think that's what resonates with his son, Robert Kennedy Jr. That he was the original environmental crusader, but not in the woke environmentalism that we see today, where it's just an excuse to get NGO money and government money. It was legitimately trying to stick it to the biggest corporations in the world to try to conserve the planet. And it's just remarkable to me how quickly the left just forgot about all that the second he was skeptical at all of the Democrat regime.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, on the environmental issues or in general?
Yeah, I just feel like that was just a powerful part of the movie that came through. It just reminded me of how I think that I, as a conservative person and someone who is generally thinks environmentalism is had been totally bastardized. I found it very resonant, and I found it to be very surprising that
Yeah.
there's no one on the left who stood up with their hand up and said, "Hey, this was our guy. Like, he was on all of our favorite stuff before. Like, he was literally all of our favorite stuff, not second tier stuff, our top tier stuff. He was
Yeah.
the best guy on it." And
Because
you just
people have
throw him out?
people have no memory. I mean, a lot of people are just sheep. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like self-evident. A lot of people have no ability to think critically for themselves, to remember, to read. Memory is a precious gift, and I think it has to do with how we've shifted. You talk about reading and writing.
Yeah.
Forces you to imagine, and more forces you to work with the mind. The more you shift out of that capacity, and you just stop refreshing your memory, and then you just go into this kind of like, daytime TV or streaming kind of consciousness where it's just whatever's the current thing. You forget. It's very rare to find people that are the holders of memory, the keepers of memory, the historians in a sense, not just from an academic perspective, but in a spiritual way, like remembering. Because if you don't remember, then it's like 1984, which warned us: who controls the past controls the future.
So the movie plays with a lot of concepts for what really could be behind the JFK assassination and the RFK assassination. And I'll leave that to the audience to go watch it and see for themselves. But do you have, on a personal level, because it's not conclusive, like you don't draw conclusions, I'm sure that's intentional. Do you on a personal level feel like you have a clear concept of what you think actually happened?
On the assassination?
But both of them, yeah, the RFK and JFK.
No, I don't have a clear concept. I think that there's a number of like higher probabilities, but who ordered it, that's always the curiosity to me. That's like the real curiosity, how these things actually like unfold. Because we understand planning. I mean, CIA runs black ops all the time, right? Especially in that era, like, well, I don't know how they currently run. I mean, obviously it's a different world, but in that era, they were doing assassinations, they were doing coups, they were doing even crazy stuff like creating sex tapes to make the Indonesian president look bad. They were doing these kind of things, right? So dirty tricks and you name it, right? So black ops that's a whole world. So how you get to like the level of who, is it people like, Rockefeller types, in the establishment talking with their friends, or like the Dulles brother type, types
Sure.
to then say, Kennedy's got to go. I mean, how does that work? I'd be very curious.
Yeah. And
yeah,
yeah, and it is, and that is that plays in a lot with the military industrial complex stuff, where whenever there's a threat to the system, it seems like then you can see the potential for something radical happening, like an assassination. And what I'm trying to understand is, where do you think Robert Kennedy Jr., what does he think really happened to his dad at this point?
Well, he's talked about it, believing that that the assassination was orchestrated by probably the same people that were involved in killing JFK. Lisa Pease's book, we interview Lisa, and her book is very thorough. She's done, she's researched this for like, I don't know, 20 years. Yeah, her book on the subject is very comprehensive. And you have to point at Robert Mayhew. Mayhew was a fascinating character, who worked as like Howard Hughes's right-hand man. He moved Hughes to Vegas because Mayhew was connected to the mob. He was a guy that was doing some of those, connections between, because Mayhew was like former FBI and CIA connected. So he was like doing the introductions to the CIA with the mafia for like the Castro, to kill Castro. So Mayhew was very plugged in. He's somebody that was like a real like, he had great access, knew a lot of people, and I think, was in a powerful enough position where he would have been able to kind of orchestrate the LAPD to cover it up, at the higher levels, to basically say, look, don't ask any more questions, don't investigate. When people said, eyewitnesses at the shooting said, hey, there was a lady in a polka dot dress saying we shot him, we shot him. When eyewitnesses saw her, there was originally like APBs, because there were I think what they happened was they had, usually this is how it goes, there was multiple teams in place. And Lisa gets into this in her book, that there's basically multiple teams in place. And that's why people thought they saw Sirhan in a different area, because it was probably lookalikes that were being used in case. So it's like, okay, if Kennedy goes through the kitchen, you have, Sirhan under hypnosis, he's going to come out. Now, whether or not he actually fired bullets, that's even a question, because he could have been firing blanks.
Yeah.
That's what the distractor is all about. And
that comes up in the film, which is interesting.
And it's like magic. It's like every time you think about how these things work, it's like magic tricks, right? The eye is drawn here, and the magic is already done as a result, right? Because you're not looking at where the real shot's taking place right behind the head. So I think there were multiple teams in place in case Kennedy had gone a different direction. He was not going to be allowed to leave that night. Kind of like how they talk about the JFK assassination, where it's like, we know like some of the Secret Service guys were pulled off, from like being right next to Kennedy, and then the driver basically comes to a stop before accelerating, right, with the car. I mean, it's like at that moment that he comes to a stop, not fully, but it was like almost a stop. That's when you can get the kill shots. And there's probably 3 or 4 different teams, right, making sure that there's no chance he's going to come out alive. So again, these things are they're black ops. They're teams that run this professionally. But as far as who calls it, that's the curiosity in my mind of like, who is it?
It's affectionate. The film's affectionate towards Robert Kennedy Jr. There's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. I want to get from your perspective why you feel like he's a unique leader in this country right now, because he is objectively. I think he's got a unique set of issues. He's got a unique persona, unique history. But what draws you to him as a character?
I think what draws me to him is the feeling that I understand, what it's like to be be character assassinated. You could call it, right? I mean, there was a film, I think it was The Contender. It was done in like the late '90s, early 2000s, and it was basically saying that you don't have to assassinate politicians anymore. You can kill them through character assassination. You can smear, you can tarnish their reputation, and I think that's what we see a lot in the last decades. Really, has been the way that some political campaigns are destroyed because of an affair, and then someone like Bill Clinton, who was probably like raping women and getting being protected by Hillary and their lawyers and the state troopers and all these people, he was able to make it into the presidency. So it goes to show you, it's not about how you treat women or whether or not you're having an affair. It's about how these things are controlled, how the media protects certain people,
right?
Because the establishment has basically said, hey, we want this person to be president. We want this to go forward. And someone else will get tarnished over something, that's, minor in comparison.
Yeah, it's interesting right now because in the context of what we were talking about, even since we started discussing doing this interview, the character assassinations against him just intensify by the day. And I'm not here to make excuses for the way politicians behave in their private life, but they are objectively trying to humiliate him, and they're trying to ruin his family life. And this is
look at the Matt Gaetz thing. Matt Gaetz, gets pulled out from he should have been the attorney general. I think he would have been a better attorney general, frankly. But I think there's a reason that they basically, exposed him in a way and made him look, made him look bad in the sexual front, such that he had to withdraw, right? So that's one of many cases where it felt like this was almost like a establishment stepping in and saying, not him.
Yeah. The Gaetz one's so interesting because I'm critical of some of the stuff he does in his public online persona, but I thought he would have been a terrific fit for attorney general. I was very enthusiastic about that at the time. And I was sad that did not work out. And I'm not a Pam, I don't try to spend a lot of time hating on Pam Bondi, but she's made a lot of the blunders, I think, and it's pretty clear that it might just be a competence issue. I'm not trying to make this an attack, but that was a missed opportunity. And you do see how they try to what strikes me as a humiliation tactic is they really want him to feel like they want to make him a disgrace. And I find that to be really interesting for a guy who stands up to authority, comes from this storied family that's dedicated so much to this country, and is, overcame such an adversity from ADHD to heroin addiction to losing his father to all of these things and then he became the face of environmentalism, but productive environmentalism, taking on these huge companies and trying to make us safer. And his whole movement is about making us all healthy. And they're like, yeah, but he banged on some journalist or something. So he's going to like ruin his life over it. It's like, what is this that we're doing here?
Right. Well, again, this is where, listen, I mean, I've had conversations with people that go, oh, he's crazy. He left a bear in Central Park. I was like, oh boy.
So give me your thoughts on the Maha movement, which is not a focus of the documentary per se, but it feels like one of the most powerful things going. And I guess I'm a member of it to a degree, but I'm not an obsessive, so I don't do a ton of show content on it. But it is a political phenomenon, I would say.
Sure. I mean, again, where does it start? It's it starts with. You could say going back to like organic, just eating organic and choosing organic as opposed to the genetic modification that we see across our food supply. But it's, obviously it runs deep with people who are concerned about, you name it, vaccine safety, the chemicals and the toxins that are in our environment and in our food supply, and the glyphosate, for example, from Monsanto. I mean, all these things are aspects of Maha, but I don't think it's not so unified as far as like I don't know if there's like one engine to point to. I think it's more of like MAGA. It's like there's certain beliefs, right? There's certain beliefs. And I think that's the beauty of the MAGA and the Maha. It's like, it's bigger than Trump. It's bigger than RFK Jr. These are people realizing like we have to protect our country. And it starts with, our borders. It starts with our health, our children's health, right? The food supply, the regulations around, vaccine schedules and whatnot, oftentimes which are toxic to some kids, and if not all. I mean, it's very interesting to sort of look at the dynamic of how this has evolved and how, again, like RFK Jr. is like a figurehead for it. But again, I think it's bigger than him, the same way that I think MAGA is bigger than Trump.
Our campaign for Preborn is going incredibly well. And I want you to think about this Thanksgiving season, how these memories that we're making right now are ones that will last a lifetime. And there's a woman right now who's pregnant and is thinking in the next couple of weeks, is she going to make a decision that will haunt her holidays forever, or will she make the best decision she ever made, choosing life, and come next Thanksgiving, come next Christmas, she will be preparing for her child's first holiday season. What could be more beautiful than that? She'll be thankful a year from now, perhaps for you, because you'll provide her that free ultrasound via Preborn where she can meet her baby for the first time, seeing the baby on the monitor, hearing the baby's heartbeat, that lub-dub on the heart rate monitor. These are profound moments in a parent's life. I know it was for me, and it could be exactly what someone needs to see or hear in order to choose life, and it's so easy to do. When a young woman sees her baby in the ultrasound, hears her baby's heartbeat, she's twice as likely to choose life. So just $140 provides 5 ultrasounds that can save 5 babies, $280, 10 babies, perhaps, and 10 ultrasounds. $15,000 gift, this. This provides ultrasounds for, who knows, years to come. Thousands of babies will benefit with a $15,000 gift that buys a whole ultrasound machine. Preborn.com/Marlow, 833-850-BABY. That's 833-850-2229. You go to alexmarlow.com, you click on the Preborn banner, or just go to preborn.com/Marlow. Please make them a part of your donations this holiday season. I truly believe in this cause. It's something interesting about the vaccines with him because I'm someone who it comes from a family that practices Western medicine, and my wife's at the hospital right now treating the community cancer patients. And yet, if you pay any attention to what he says, he's not actually anti-vax. He's just trying to bring science and the scientific method to the schedules, and to actually know that the science is never settled, and you got to revisit stuff, and you got to test stuff over and over again, and there are confounding factors, and we can't just go on autopilot on this topic. And it's ironic to me because he's the one who's more pro-science to me than his critics. His critics are the ones who just want us to stay on autopilot and just put our head down, do the exact same thing, even as medicine change, the data changes, other confounding factors change. And I just find that to be, frankly, kind of scary in a way. The way he's been portrayed as he's just an anti-vax guy, which is just, he's a year into the job. Have we seen any anti-vax moves that he's done? Has he done anything anti-vax in the first year of this job? He hasn't at all. It just, this is what kind of drives me nuts. It also amuses me to some degree, Sean, but it does drive me nuts about this country, is that we just choose not to accept these things, even though they're right in front of our nose.
I think Maha is most critical. The most critical of Bobby Kennedy is coming from Maha, that he's not doing enough rapidly enough, because he's fighting his own battles to stay in position without being ousted, right? And oftentimes you have to compromise, and it's very problematic in our political system, right? The compromises that have to be made. So yeah, I think he could. Ideally he would do more, but we'll see what he can achieve in the time that he's allowed.
So RFK Legacy, you can get Apple, Amazon, Angel Studios, which is where I watched it. I think you guys are going to learn a lot while you're entertained as well. And you get to hear from the source himself, Robert Kennedy, on a lot of his thinking, which I think is interesting, just about his family and about him. What is your ideal audience member? I know you want everyone to watch it, but I think about this a lot. Like, I want politicians in Washington to listen to my show. I want families with kids, with middle schoolers in the car to listen to my show. But I always think about, like my ideal is like my wife, who does not have enough time to get all of her politics, but is a smart person. And she's got 45 minutes a day I want this to be the best 45 minutes she spends getting the news. I love that. Is there someone in mind when you were making this, you're thinking this is the crowd that needs to see this?
Sure. I didn't think of it as any one crowd, but I do feel like this is for the young people that don't know who RFK Sr. is. They don't know, what he was, or even JFK really. And I want them to be able to look at this as what a leader should sound like and behave like, and strive to be.
What about the two Robert Kennedy's leadership? Did any of it surprise you while you were going through the process of putting this together?
No, I can't say anything surprised me, because kind of the idea came from reading, from a mixture of things. Some people suggesting, that RFK story, paralleling his father, right? RFK Jr. is throwing his hat in to run for office the way that his father had, and father, tragically died in the process. So that was a great parallel. And then reading Brothers by Talbot, which went into, Dave Talbot's a great journalist, and he actually just had a stroke, I think last year, unfortunately. So hopefully, he's doing okay. But he's done, incredible work in his lifetime. And Brothers was a book basically about how important RFK was in JFK's administration. And also it gets into, some of RFK's thinking in terms of the conspiracy to kill his brother. So that was an important book. And then, again, I can't say anything really surprised me. I don't feel that, there are other elements that I could have gone into. Let's put it like that. I could have gone into the story, which I think is a story in its own right, about Marilyn Monroe's death, because some people think RFK was responsible. He was the last one that we know saw her alive. But I think there was more than that. Just, I don't think that RFK had her killed. I think there was something else going on. And so I think there is a twisted story, obviously, with the Kennedys and women. We know that. I think a lot of people have done books and exposés on those subjects.
Sure.
So, we didn't really delve into those topics because I wanted to stay focused on, again, this battle with the establishment and that storyline, because that's what I want to inspire the youth with.
Is there a call to action here that you're envisioning? What would you like for people to do if they're fired up after watching it?
Hmm. You know, everyone's going to have a different path in life. Some people may get more involved with politics and Maha and movements like this, right? Others may want to get involved in politics and, run for office. I think the youth getting involved in politics is a great thing. And so again, if a young person sees this and says, I want to, maybe become more like RFK and RFK Jr. and, be a politician in that vein, like a Kennedy Democrat, right? That would be a good thing. We need more Kennedy Democrats than the current progressive Democrats.
Gosh, wouldn't that be an improvement? That'd be very, very nice if we could see that. Sean, I appreciate you doing this and putting in all the work on these things. Last question. Where do you get your news? Where are your favorite places to read and stay informed?
I try not to.
Yeah. Safer bet these days.
I mean, I honestly I don't even want to engage anymore. I just prefer to focus on like I said, you were talking about consciousness, where you focus on. I just try to focus on my reality. And, the news will find me that's relevant to me. But again, like news is like the weather, it's like today it's raining, the next day it's sunny, today's warm, tomorrow's cold. It's like, I'm not going to let that ruin my life.
Well, that was the most surprising answer I've got so far today. So that's a fun place to leave it. Thanks for all the time today on the Alex Marlow Show and Breitbart. And it's nice to make your acquaintance and keep up the good work and keep making interesting films for all of us. That's today's show. Thanks to Misty and John Cassio for pulling clips. Thanks for Molly Marlow for setting this up. And all of you should go check out RFK Legacy, getting absolute raves, by the way. So congrats on that, too. Just a awesome score, over 8 on IMDb. That's huge. So good stuff, Sean. And thanks to all of you. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.